In requirements gathering, when you're learning how to do that, they teach you to ask why like 5 times. Somebody says, well, I need this. I need X. It's like, okay, why do you need X? And then they give you an answer. And you're like, okay, well, but why? And eventually, the goal there is to figure out what the person actually needs instead of what they think they need.
From Alvia, this is Preferred Return, your opportunity to learn from the brightest minds in the private capital market. Ready to own your technology edge? Let's get you that preferred return.
Data is the lifeblood of modern decision-making, but turning raw data into actionable insights, that's no small feat. Lauren Schirle has made a career out of bridging that gap, combining her background in archival sciences and information management with her expertise in fund administration to tackle some of the most pressing challenges in financial data access and organization. In this episode of Preferred Return, Lauren takes us on a journey through her unique career path, sharing how she's helped firms unlock the stories hidden within their data. We'll explore the importance of data quality, the human side of information literacy, and how to design systems that work for everyone, from the most tech-savvy users to those just finding their footing. Let's get into it. All right, Lauren Schirle, welcome to Preferred Return. We're so excited to have you here, especially to dig into your background, because you have a very unique path. You went from working and studying in archival sciences to the finance world and GP portals. So can you go ahead and cannonball right in and tell us a little bit about that journey and what brought about that change?
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. So I currently work for a firm called VIRIDIS Fund Solutions. We're a full service fund admin managing about 300 plus entities and 30 billion in assets under administration. And we're really new. So I've had the opportunity to put a lot of hats on already, and I'm finding a lot of connections to my past and the things that I did in very different versions of my career path in life. So jumping back in that direction, I studied history for undergrad. I was at University of Denver and thought I was going to be a teacher. Spent 4 years studying history, minored in econ, and gender and women's studies was all about finding connection between lots of different fields and particularly the humanities. And while I was there, I got to do a capstone project where I worked in archives. I worked with a lot of archival data at the Western History and Genealogy Archives in Denver. If you look at historical data, they don't think of paperwork from the 1880s as data, but that's what it is. And so doing my history capstone was the first time that I really got to go and pull information from all these different sources and figure out how to organize it in a way that told a story and, could have an impact on whoever was viewing it. So fast forward a few years, I had lived in the mountains and worked at ski resorts and done all sorts of different things that you can do to make money in your early 20s, making $12 an hour, and decided that I wanted to go into a master's program and thought back to that time in the archives and figured that library and information science and working with cultural heritage organizations and potentially archival data could be a good path for me. So I went to the University of Maryland and started in that program, their MLIS program. But about 2 weeks in, I realized that I wanted to do more of the information science side, and that part really hadn't gotten fully built up within those programs yet. So I ended up in an information management program, and I ended up getting to combine both things. But with the MIM program, Master's Information Management, I was able to work with developers and computer science students and project managers and take those humanities projects and bring them to life in a way that people could access online. That was really the big archival science portion of my life. And after I graduated, I needed a job and I had PM experience. So I switched gears and ended up in operations and marketing, and then in a consumer products role, and now in fund admin, because the fact of the matter is that information that needs organizing is in every industry. And now I've landed in this one, and there's a lot of information to organize.
That's fascinating. And you said a little bit there as you traveled in your career and also geographically. You said a little bit about that was interesting, where you got really interested in information sciences around getting people access to that information. And you also mentioned about the stories that data tells. How are those two concepts interwoven in terms of helping data tell a story, but getting it in front of the eyes in a more digestible fashion?
When it comes to the work I was doing with like historic materials and that kind of stuff, like it's all closed off in this space, right? It's in a library that not a whole lot of people walk into, and it's in these books that nobody opens. And I see a lot of parallels to that in business, right? Like we collect all of this information because we're told that it's going to be important someday, or that like AI needs it to tell us our futures. But if you don't know how to access it and it's not available in a way that is accessible to the people that need it, then it's really not useful. It's taking up space. It's using up energy. And I think that what's important to me is figuring out how to build systems and build processes and like teach people how to use that information in a way that makes it valuable. And that's true for historical data, and it's true for financial data, and it's true for marketing information. And that's kind of like where I've come at it from every direction.
It's interesting. And then you said a part there, as you found it, it's like architecting, like taking maps, digitizing them, making them more accessible to people sounds like a Herculean task, right? But the other part of it is meeting people where they are and having them lean into how to consume that data. Those two things in terms of the adoption of people to the data, as well as architecting it clearly, which one do you think is more important? People wanting to use data to get answers, or is it more about like really super clear access and ease of use?
I mean, clearly it's a combination of those two things, but teaching people how to find information is probably in the long run more important than exactly how we present it at any given time. Because the way that data is presented, the way that systems are designed is going to consistently change, right? Like we see that every other year in our work. Stuff moves around, like different ways of presenting analytics pop up. And people can manipulate that in a lot of ways to tell the story that they want to tell, right? But if you really teach people how to ask a lot of questions and how to ask the right questions and how to use systems and think critically in like the context of how data gets stored, I think that you're going to have a population of people that are able to get much better information out of these things. Because like we talk about data and information, right? A lot of times we use those terms interchangeably, but like it only becomes information once you're able to do something with it, right? Like it's information when you're analyzing it and build opinions based on it. A data point is just a single thing like floating out in ether, right? So the systems are important. They always will be. But I am a strong believer in teaching people how to utilize any system so that they can be effective with the data that's there.
I love what you said, that the data only becomes information once it has a use or it's trying to solve a problem. I love that. It's also very insightful, right? Just a side question. I walk into the museum in Denver. I have to imagine that there's so many different people coming in trying to do a billion different things from this data that is an information that is being kept or hard to see. I walk in, I obviously know nothing about cartography, maps, the data lives in there. Were there like 3 pieces of advice you'd give a new learner of how to navigate that information that seems so obtuse to me in a way that would help me be a lifetime learner, like you just described?
Yeah. So using maps as a starting point for that. I think that approaching something like that, approaching a map with questions is the very first thing. A lot of people walk into a museum as kind of my reality, but also as an analogy for a system full of information, right? And they expect to look at a thing and know what it is and be told a story versus coming in and and asking questions of the thing. So with maps, the questions that I've asked is like, how were these used? Like, why were they created? In my research, I used Sanborn fire insurance maps a lot, which most people don't know that exists. But for years, insurance companies, in order, like homeowners and property insurance companies, Sanborn companies specifically, built these maps of every major city that they insured people in. And every block they had charted out the kinds of buildings that were there. And they had different keys to tell you if it was a wood building or a concrete building or like all these different things. And so it really told you a lot about how people used different parts of the city over the years, because you take one of these big, huge folios out and look at it. And then you take the one out from 5 years down the road and you can see how cities develop. And if you just walk in and see these big, huge books sitting there, it just looks like a lot of undigestible information. But if you start to ask questions about why was this person telling this story and like what was important to them and what kind of questions could I ask now that I have that context, right? So with those particular maps, I was able to piece together the way that food production developed in Denver. You saw in like the earlier ones, you could see a lot of these small structures that were generally chicken coops all throughout the city. And then at about the same time that you see a whole section of the maps develop where all of the meat processing plants near the railroads got built up, all of a sudden all those little chicken coop structures start to disappear. And you start to see a different way of people managing food production. So, when you walk in and you see a map, it's like, okay, well, there's a lot of lines. But if you have questions that you want answers to, and you start to figure out like, all right, if I need an answer to that question now, how would I go figure that out? And start to use your kind of Sherlock skills to figure out how to use things differently. They become a lot more interesting and approachable. So
that's a great answer. And it's fascinating too, because it's so oftentimes we come to data because we're trying to get an answer and we're trying to fit the data into our answer. Whereas what you're saying, it's like you come to the data with a question. And if you can understand like what you're trying to consume within the framework of the story of the person or the system that's being created to you, then that unlocks how you can navigate almost more questions.
Exactly. Like, forgive me if I'm going on a tangent, but
you can go wherever you want.
All right, cool. So I've been thinking through the things that we're going to talk about today. And I kept coming back to the idea of information literacy, which is kind of what I've been describing in terms of teaching people how to think about information and systems and teaching people how to ask the right questions. We do that from the time that kids are little. You teach them how to find a book in the library. And then, you get to college and you learn how to research a database to find information for a paper. Well, when you get into business, you need those same skills. And a lot of people don't make those correlations and think about all of the whys that you're supposed to ask to get to the root of a question, right? And that's one of the things that I really got out of my information management program was working with like technical developers. You have to learn how to do requirements gathering processes. And requirements gathering, when you're learning how to do that, they teach you to ask why like 5 times. Like, somebody says, well, I need this. I need X. It's like, okay, why do you need X? And then they give you an answer. And you're like, okay, well, but why? And eventually, as the project planner, as the technical person in the room, the goal there is to figure out what the person actually needs instead of what they think they need. And often they're very different because they want this picture that's painted in front of them. And they think that they're asking the right question, and they're often not. And that's not throwing shade. It's like everybody does it, right? There's a reason that you bring somebody in to ask why a lot of times, because it's hard to do that for yourself. But I think that process is important for people to think about in a lot of different aspects of their life. And that's especially true in like data management and systems management and any business development, process development work. But it's also been true in very different career paths for me. So,
and you talked about information literacy, and part of it, when I think about the work that you do, which is diverse, but a lot of it about you're visually depicting data within a portal to a subset of an audience, right? Of these LPs. That information literacy, is that baked in almost to the user experience that you tried to do, where it's trying to understand, like you told a little bit before you're talking about a story, right? What's a story of information consumption for that LP? And is UX meant to solve that kind of information literacy you're talking about?
That's the goal. I mean, when you think about the beginning phases of like user experience design, people like develop personas for people in order to build out their platforms. Like they have the different like user personas to figure out exactly what information they think someone, different kinds of users need. And I think that that's really important to keep in mind. And I think there's lots of ways to develop and design to those different needs. So like in the context of my current role and the kinds of users that we see in the portal, like we've got GPs and we've got LPs and we've got auditors and we've got Joe's accountant that like needs to just access tax data. And all of them need something a little bit different. So designing with the ability to set those kinds of profiles and it is helpful. And if you can't separate those things out for different user types, then designing in a way that like starts with the bare minimum and allows people to like kind of drill down into the information that's important to them so that they're not overwhelmed by too much at the beginning, I think is really critical.
There's so much data, it can get overwhelming instantaneously. In thinking about that simple to more diverse, is that kind of the experience that helps guide them through a click basis into articulating their question better through the way they interact with the system? Is that kind of that's the mechanism of clicking is the why that you were talking about earlier?
Every click is someone asking a question, right? Like, how do I see this? Why does this matter? Like drilling into an analytics tool, like every click is trying to get a new answer, right? And I think that having the ability to design in a way that helps people get there is very important, especially because we've got people coming in with lots of different levels of knowledge and comfort with these kinds of systems, especially in this little niche of the finance world with private markets. Like you've got people who are coming in highly technically capable and they're used to navigating lots of different analytics tools. Like it's their job to be in and out of this information all day. And they want to be able to get everything that they need out of this system. And then you have people who really struggle to reset their password. And you've got to be able to support all of them, right? So that like simple first, but allowing people to drill down to information, I think is a really good place to start when it comes to design of this kind of stuff.
And it's also fascinating where it's like when you see an interaction or a screen within a portal, you see the whole architecture that sits behind it, right? Like the data point.
I've got a database in my head.
Exactly. Exactly. So it's like you, like in the structure of that information literacy you're talking about is that you're almost trying to guide them down a conversation with their data that is like, it takes an if then, and a kind of conditional formatting. It's like, how are they going to interact with the data? It's really interesting. What you said about data was so spot on that like, it's just data becomes information when it has a use. About now they're able to almost talk to their data through AI and this kind of moment now where people are like, if I can't articulate what I'm trying to understand from a prompt, how am I supposed to understand what I need from it? And I think what you said in the beginning about asking questions, now it's almost like we're being dragged back into this asking more questions phase of our like childhood, right? Where it's like we're asking more to kind of refine our questioning skills.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't think that that's a perspective that a lot of people are talking about because the way that we talk about new technology, more technology, AI implementations, AI service bots, and those sorts of things, the chat GPT of the world, like people come with the question that they want answered, plug it in, and then copy and paste a lot of response data, right? And I know that people are in the habit of reviewing that and trying to like make it sound like a real person and everything, but you're losing all of the context around the question if you don't come at something with more than one question to start with. So when I'm talking to people who are like new to using AI tools about like how to approach it, I try to tell them to ask the same question a few different ways and then ask the tool to, combine all of those answers, right? Because that's what's going to give you the full perspective in libraries. And one of the things that like librarians really drill in on in terms of what they love about like the physicality of a library is that if you go to a library catalog and look up the book that you think you need, then it gives you a call number. And you walk through all of the aisles and past a whole bunch of other stuff until you get to the section that's about that topic. And then you have to walk past 1,000 books and one by one kind of look through them on the shelf to find the call number that you're looking for. And like historically, like that provided you with a lot of context about everything that surrounded that one little topic that you were looking for. And you might end up picking up 4 books off that shelf to get a bigger answer than what you were originally gunning for. And I think that that's it's a pro and a con to AI, is that it like leads us to these very specific answers very quickly, which is helpful in decision making, right? And like the efficiency we want to see in business. But I think that as a result, we're losing a lot of context because people aren't coming to the table looking for it. And those are the sorts of things that I hope we start to think about, how we can frame clients' information in a way that allows them to see it against other data, put it into bigger context at times.
Do you see a lot with like portals and portal design there, where it's like visually showing them like information that is probably germane to what you think their use case is, but then also kind of allowing room on the edges for things they may find interesting?
I don't see a lot of it. I think that in general, when we log into any portal that has to do with our finances, you want to see your information. But what I always really find useful is being able to see those sorts of things like against a standard, or a benchmark. For example, like I am in the process of buying a house right now. And so when I go in and look at my disclosures documents, I see my interest rate and I see like the average, the price of my home. But then on the next page, my lender's giving me all of that information about like the information about what the averages in my area are and what my interest rate is in comparison to the national and state averages. And those things are really helpful in making me understand if like the decisions that I'm making are good ones, right? So I would love to see like more of that in our analytics tools so that investors can start to see like how they're stacking up against, one fund is stacking up against another. I don't know that like strategically that's always like in the best interest of the client, but from a data nerd perspective, I would really love to be able to see all of that. And I'm sure that our clients would probably like to see how their investments are tracking against each other and those sorts of things.
Yeah, I definitely think so too. I mean, there's that benchmarking so you can see for the information you're interested in, where is it relative to that whole data set or external data sets. That's always fascinating. We had on the podcast a gentleman who was talking about how as you get more fluent with these different data points, what he found in the users that were using them is that they came up with better questions. So the ability to navigate, basically what you're saying, that information access, like being able to navigate it better after using it, they got to a level of mastery that was much lower to the ground because it was easier to interact with. But as a result, they were able to start asking better questions. So from that like frictionless mastery that they were able to get from a strong information access, the questions started coming more from there, which is really fascinating from what you're saying, which is like we need to contextualize the questions and probably maybe benchmark our questions a little bit as much as we need to benchmark the answers.
I think so. I mean, anytime that somebody has like new exposure to a system or to information, like they're going to start asking new questions. And that's probably like my favorite part about like working with people to set this kind of stuff up, right? Is even like the internal interests is showing someone what's possible and then seeing their brain start to tick like, oh, well, if you can do that, then we could probably do this too, right? And it's like, yeah, let's add that on. That's, where it's fun to start playing with configuration and all of this. So
it's interesting that you don't hear that story a lot, right? Where you're talking about, I mean, oftentimes when people listen to like, hey, how do I talk about information access and information literacy? No one can make the leap from like how I organize data to inspiring creativity and question mindset in the end user. Like that's a pretty big leap, And the way that you're thinking about like I'm creating learner attitude, making people who are formerly just consumers now trying to navigate and learn from the data. Like that's a pretty momentous shift, right?
Yeah, and I think it's one that we're seeing across the board, like most people have all the answers that they think they want and need in their pocket at any given time, right? And I think that this industry has to keep up with that desire for quick information, the same as any other industry. So it's interesting to see the different levels of information that people want. There's people who want it all, and there's people who don't. They want somebody else to be thinking about that, and catering to both of those things at the same time can be a challenge, but a worthwhile one.
Yeah, I gotta think you have a lot of personas who are coming in, especially on your client side, about level of detail and too much detail. It's like constantly trying to navigate between the two brains and how they consume it, right?
Yeah. Operating out of an investor services inbox for a while will teach you a lot about what's important to different users. That's for sure.
I really love that story, and especially about information literacy. Have to ask a specific question now because I read it on your LinkedIn bio, and I can genuinely say I have no idea what it means. You studied, I'm going to get it right, inclusive information access barriers. What is that?
Yeah. So let me tell you a little bit about the specific research projects that I worked on in graduate school. So I worked a lot with a group called the Digital Curation and Innovation Center at University of Maryland at their College of Information. And I don't know that center still exists, but it was run by a professor who's still there, Dr. Richard Marciano. And they really combined technology and digital humanities. So telling history, historical stories, or telling stories about people and the things that they're doing, right? And figuring out how to do all of that from a really interesting and accessible place. Stuff that you at one point would have had to take a class to learn about, anybody being able to go onto the internet and learn about it in a way that is easily digestible, right? So the two big projects that I worked on while I was there, one was specifically through the DCIC, and it was called Mapping Inequality. And we had a whole archive, a big collection of documents from Asheville, North Carolina that represented all of the documentation from a project that was referred to as an urban renewal project, mostly I think in the 60s and 70s. And it was sort of the aftermath, the tail end of a whole bunch of federal programs that were called redlining programs, where the federal government gave money to states and cities to redevelop areas in the name of getting rid of blight and for urban renewal. But what that generally meant is that those funds went towards development in areas that were predominantly owned by African American families. And the government basically used those funds to buy their property for pennies on the dollar and then knock all the homes down and build, a new shopping mall in the name of progress. And so that happened all across the country, and we ended up with this collection of documents specifically about Asheville. And they're literally typewritten documents that have all of these appraisal values on them. And we needed to get all of that information and datafy it, right? To be able to tell a story with that and to give some of that information to the family members of people who lost their homes. And so we went through all of these documents. We put together a database with all of these values and started to understand what the cost of actual reparations would be in these cases. And we're able to tell a story, and some of that got used in actual cases to start talking about paying out reparations to impacted families and that sort of thing. And so when you think about inclusivity in information literacy and inclusivity in systems design, when you are talking about providing information to a people group or for a specific reason, you need to really think about who it is that you're talking to and why it matters. And so in this sort of situation, we needed to speak to the population of people that were going to be using this data, and we needed to put it in a place that was accessible to them. Keeping it locked up in this database format and only giving it to researchers doesn't really do a whole lot of good. And right. So making sure that you're designing with the needs of the population that is using the information in mind is really important. Slightly shorter story, but my other big research project was all about the information needs of people breastfeeding. And so I worked with a woman Fiona Jardine, who was doing her doctoral research half with the College of Information and half with the School of Public Health. And it was all about the information access needs of these people. And it was a group of people that were exclusively pumping to feed their babies. And there wasn't a whole lot of information available to them about how to do that effectively and to like keep up their milk supply and all of these sorts of things. And there's such a variety of people speaking different languages with different internet access abilities, whether that's in terms of their actual like access to a computer and to the internet, or if they can read the information that's in front of them. There's a lot of different barriers to information access, and making sure that the people who need that information are able to get it and to digest it, and then to be able to ask questions about it is kind of at the core of designing any system that's supposed to be providing information.
That's fascinating, number one. And two, it's like, do I have access to it? Do I know how to use it? And how to navigate from here? It's like, those are kind of, I think those hold true across everything, right? Like the sea of information there, like, how do I find what I need to solve this question? How do I have access to it? And then how do I have mastery on it, and like kind of self-teaching myself the questions I need to go from there? That reminds me of something you said before, is that you were talking to a lot of your friends, colleagues who are librarians, and that they're, a lot of the stuff they work on is like, but they're teaching information literacy to 5-year-olds, right? About how do I ask a question and then go solve it in the context of a library? Is there anything you've gleaned it? Because if it's so simple that a 5-year-old can do it with information literacy, I'm sure even I can now. So are there any lessons that you glean from teaching a 5-year-old that I can cheat off of?
I think the great thing about 5-year-olds is that they remain curious, and they are the experts at asking why about 100 times. But no, I think that teaching information literacy really builds on itself. And when I speak to kids versus like the implications of whether or not a population of people is information literate, like in business and down the road, I think that my main aim is to just get the point across that it's important to talk about at all of these different phases. And it's important like now in business, right? Anybody that had to write a report their freshman year of college probably had to go sit in the teaching room at the library and learn how to use those databases, at least someone my age and older. But I think there's a lot of people that didn't go through those sorts of processes, or they don't think about the systems they use every day to do their jobs in the same critical way. Especially large organizations that have the resources to really build out training programs should have that forward thinking to plan to teach and reteach what information literacy looks like in the context of their organizations. Because you can hire the most impressive person with the most impressive resume, but if they don't know how to ask the right questions for your circumstances and how to use the tools that are there for your business in a way that's going to get the best answers out of them, then like you're wasting that resource.
You know, we talk a lot in our company about like there's growth versus fixed mindsets, right? This growth mindset of like constantly trying to evolve or seeing a setback as an opportunity to learn goes through a lot of our discourse, right, on a daily basis. But one of the things you said at the beginning that I'm chewing on is this concept of like, how do you teach that 5-year-old keep asking why type mindset? Because as we get more advanced in our careers and age, we start to think that we know the solution, and our point of view gets narrower and narrower and narrower at times. It gets very fixed. Have you seen in either from your colleagues or studies or even interacting with clients and portals, like how can we excite that 5-year-old of keep asking why?
Yeah. I mean, I think at the root of that is allowing people to ask those questions and encouraging them to ask those questions. I think that the deeper you get into any industry or career path, more I think people are scared to ask why a lot of times, because we want to look like we know the answers. And the more data that we have in front of us, like the more we don't know about it, right? Like, and I think that in a lot of environments, people don't feel like they're allowed to ask those questions because they're supposed to come to the table with an answer. And I think that as a result of those kinds of expectations have really lost a lot of the sense of collaboration and like creativity that can drive better business and drive better ways of, encourage better ways of doing things. And yeah, so really it's all about culture in that way. And I hate like the term culture in business can mean a whole lot of things, but if you foster an environment like in any space that lets people know that it is acceptable and encouraged to ask a lot of questions, then I think that you end up with a lot more confidence in your people and you get better results.
10 out of 10, print that on a bumper sticker somehow. The biggest bumper sticker in history of time.
It'd be really long.
Yeah, that culture is written about, like Lorne Michaels and SNL, and like kind of that safety of being able to take a risk or ask a question is so integral in group collaboration, as well as exploring questions, making sure that everyone's asking questions and challenging assumptions is so hypercritical. Do you see, especially from your data lens and people working more remotely, right? Less opportunities to engage with a team face to face. Do you think some of that burden shifts to the systems that we use to kind of help drive us to ask more questions as we engage with a prompt as opposed to a person?
100%. Because people are so used to clicking one thing and getting an answer out of it that they have often like lost the ability to think beyond that when utilizing the systems and tools in front of them. And also, I think that they've started to lose their patience with colleagues in terms of like allowing for the time to really dig into those sorts of like what if conversations. And you want things to be efficient and for people to be able to make clear decisions, and not everyone always needs to have a voice in every piece of problem solving, right? Like you need to be able to move quickly. But I do think that we've gotten so focused on like jump from one Zoom call to the next that everyone's tired and just wants to get stuff done and forgets that once upon a time, like we did sit in a room and just talk about it all and like go to happy hour afterwards and complain. And so you can figure out like the solution sitting there, you know? And I am always going to be a proponent of remote work. I really like my time, but I find that the remote work that has worked the best, like the teams that I've worked with remotely that have been the most successful are the ones that still made a really big point of regularly meeting and getting to know each other and bouncing ideas off of one another and still having that like rapport so that you do feel safe asking lots of questions.
Yeah, it's a very like interesting trade-off. With the technology that advanced, you have this immediacy that now just runs as a subcurrent across our entire lives. The immediacy for information on the phone, something like that, is like now programmed to the DNA, where as we see a problem, it's about speed to solve rather than just seeing the problem and analyzing that from a holistic sense to say, you know, this problem's meeting us in this time in our work or in our life. What is it like? What's the bigger picture, right? Like, why should we just kind of knuckle down and get to know this problem really, really well and really get close with it, as opposed to just trying to go through it or around it or over it? It's like those teams that are able to see those obstacles for the opportunities they are to kind of maybe recenter or shift strategy. Those are really where you see those like outsized gains from organizations.
Yeah. And it can be hard to do because things move so quickly as a result of how like accessible information is at any given time, right? So in order to be competitive, there's this like impetus to just keep sprinting towards things. And it's important to be able to keep up that speed. I 100% understand. But as a result, there's a lot of wasted time. And people think they're saving time by running. As the person on the back end who has had to clean up a lot of the mess that gets made from people not really thinking through all of the details before they jump, I know how inefficient it can be. And I don't have the answer. If I did, I'd have a whole lot more money than I do. But I hope that we start to find better ways to like be competitive while still taking the amount of time that's necessary to think through things. And sometimes that's just only possible in a really large organization that is already kind of set. So coming from the perspective of a lot of startup world work, I haven't had the opportunity to have that time often, but I hope that we start to figure out how to use all of these tools in ways that save us time in other places so that we can think more critically about the decisions that we're making.
I agree. Think about that immediacy where it's, you know, we look at problems and these things we face about like how quickly we can get past them. And a lot of times what we're seeing, especially from your background, seeing the back end, the structure, how we structure the back end to solve this very finite solution, is like what we're seeing is a lot of times, as opposed to trying to go through the problem. It's like, why don't you invite the problem to sit next to you and ride shotgun as you go together forward? Because that problem's going to evolve. It's going to change. It's going to have different faces. So it's like, you can't let it go. You got to kind of pull it closer. It seems counterintuitive, right? Get the problem, identify, but then like welcome it like a friend, and then you like go that journey together, which sounds like a bad bumper sticker, which we'll never publish. But we see it a lot, right? We're seeing it right now, where it's especially AI. Everyone has to have a solution out there tomorrow, and you have to be first mover advantage. Gets super fast as opposed to you get out there, and then when you get to use it, it's half thought out. Where it's like, or you can move more pragmatically, slow down, go take AI to like where your clients are, where the problem is, and sit with it a while and let's see how it evolves. And now you have a mature meeting that the technology marries to that whole process, not just this immediate question, which I know from your, and especially in the back end, it's like how you structure all that data to be able to be more powerful to easily answer those questions. That's got to be what you think about day in, day out. But the answers are always the opposite side of people coming to you from the opposite and saying like, how do you solve this now?
And I hope that the way that we are able to construct things in this industry, specifically I've worked with clients that are managing funds in a lot of different asset classes at this point, but a large portion of who I'm surrounded by are people that have their expertise in venture capital. And having been with my last role, I was working with a startup, and that VC funding is how we existed, right? And so a lot of those not bad decisions, but fast decisions got made as a result of the lack of capital, right? Like we only had a month to be able to turn a profit so that everybody still had a job and so that the company was viable. And maybe that's a bit of hyperbole, but like I know what it's like to be on the other side of needing that funding. And so if we can improve things in especially the VC space in a way that allows more people to invest in the things that they want to invest in, allows for like more smart companies to have access to the capital that they need to be able to take the time to do things correctly. Like it's just the kinds of projects that could get stood up, the kinds of services and businesses that could get started, I think could be really cool. So I think that's the neat part about being in this side of it is that if we do what we want to do effectively and make money while doing it, like hopefully we're like allowing other people the opportunity to take that time to do things right also.
That's awesome. It's very interesting that you have those two lenses, right? Because now you have an empathy from both sides of the table about what it's there. And so it's like, I think you talked at the very beginning about the stories that it tells, right? Like being able to see both those sides of the stories about needing the money to do the project and how do I articulate the value in that through the data versus, hey, I'm on the other side of the coin. I'm trying to translate all that data, which are those stories that are the most important, and like providing a middle ground to allow both those to meet is a fascinating piece of work because it's all coming from the same angle, but like sometimes the data just makes you two ships passing the night, you know?
Exactly.
I think one of the things that's interesting is, you know, we've talked about how data especially like through a portal is the lens we're looking through, the diverse needs that come from an LP who's engaging with the portal. I guess the other side that people don't want to talk about so much is like, where do you see the frustration hit a lot of these LPs? Is it speed with, like you're saying, speed with which they can get to the finite data point? Or is it like comprehensiveness of they can't go to one place and solve all of their questions?
I would say that the biggest frustrations I see are a lack of real-time information, because the same way that we've spoken about this stuff in the context of other information needs and just like what people expect in this day and age in terms of their access, at least what I have witnessed to this point in this field is that it's still very much on like a bit of an old school, like quarterly cadence, and there isn't that same real-time feedback. And so people want it the second it's available, and they want it before it's available. And it can be hard to navigate that when you're working with clients that are operating a lot of funds. And yeah, so I would say that real-time access is a big thing. And then the way it's framed, right? I think that across the board, when you look at financial reporting and tax reporting, all that kind of information is still very heavily found in PDF style documents, like lots of legal jargon, those sorts of things. And so when a business's whole systems is all based around building out reporting that meets those legal needs and those like historically rooted financial industry requirements. A lot of times it's just not organized in a way that is as easily manipulated, right? So right now we would love to get more analytics information in front of our clients and their LPs. But in order to do that, you got to integrate systems and you got to pull accounting data from one place and put it in another place. And so there's just a lot of logistics there that can make that difficult. And people are so used to being able to see every data point like in real time. And when that doesn't exist quite yet because of the way that business operates against requirements and regulations, it can slow down that progress.
That makes sense. So is there advice if there was Sam with GP and I'm just thinking about trying to surface my data, my information outward, are there any top piece of advice you give them as they come? Because you talked about a lot of different data sources where it's like, part of it is like, do I need to get my stuff together? Like, how do I come prepared? And are there pieces of advice that you'd say that you should tactically get together before coming?
Yeah, data's only a system and the analytical capabilities of a system are only as good as the data that you put into it, right? So data quality is ridiculously important in order to make any of this stuff effective. And I think that also along the same lines of everyone expects things to just kind of work because they're not used to seeing like the secret sauce behind how it all works, right? So they hear, okay, I'm purchasing this system or I'm purchasing this like software service. And therefore I have data and I have analytics and I have answers to my questions now, right? And my clients can log in and see all of that information, right? If you give us good data. And a lot of people think that they're buying an outcome without understanding what they need to do to like effectively give that system all the inputs it needs to do its job. You're buying the tool, like you're not buying the materials. You have to bring the materials to the table. And it kind of goes back to the training that's necessary, right? Like, I don't think most people understand how important the values that they're typing into their CRM, like, are in like the long-term ability to analyze data sets. If you're only sporadically populating investor information, then you're not going to be able to get consistent results out of these sorts of tools. So I think that my biggest piece of advice is like really drill down on your data quality planning and make it clear to your people why what they do matters and how it connects to other portions of the business. Because if they think that, you know, I'm the one transcribing all this information out of a subscription document to populate investor information, and I'm never going to need this one person's title ever, right? So I'm just going to skip it and not put it in because I need to input 500 other pieces of information, right? What that person doesn't understand is that down the road, when we want to see analytics about the kinds of people that are using our system or how many auditors needed access to this kind of tax document, we don't have that value. Those are the pieces of information that people want when they're making decisions about how to like move in business. And, you know, there's a million examples that you can lay out, but those little moments of time saving from a data input and ingest and gathering moment, they really cost you in terms of outcomes in the long run. So I would encourage people to pay attention to that.
I may be wholly biased, but 100% agree. But I'm wholly biased. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you said the same thing you've been saying this whole show, right? Is that it's about that story behind it. It's like remind people why the work they're doing matters, because what may seem like a mundane data entry is additive to the end insight that you're going to ask for down the road. And today's picture and the bigger story about how you leverage that data that you live and breathe by to make real decisions that understand the whole problem really well, and you get a higher degree of confidence in solving. So it's like, it does matter, right? And it's so interesting. Let's watch the people that we talk to where it's like, some of these stuff does seem very mundane about data entry and data organization to the outside, but when you see in the big picture, it's so hypercritical and you have such a deeper appreciation for it when you're doing it, knowing it's like, I'm going to need this later, or here's how it can be outsizely impactful as we start to analyze it.
Yeah. I mean, if you want to explain it in accounting terms. It's like, if you round every dollar, like you're going to be way off when you've got a million inputs, right? The information you're getting out is inaccurate if you're not putting the right values in from the beginning. And I think that across the board, we talk about how on a social level, like, cultural context of the whole thing, we talk about how much is getting done with AI and how much all of our new analytical capabilities mean in the context of decision making and business and every aspect of our life. But I think being on the back end and seeing the minutia of all of that data, I think that we're still kind of in our infancy in terms of being able to make effective choices with the information we're getting out.
Agree. No, that's really well put, especially that data quality and cleanliness it's not anything that people wake up and jump out of bed for a lot of times, but it also is something that they stay awake sleeping about when they need it.
Yeah. So maybe we can put the AI to work scraping the internet for the values we need and then move on to the analytics portion.
So this podcast is in no way, shape, or form supposed to be promotional for Alvia, but I feel like Jeff Rice, our CTO, seeded you with that question because of what he's working on with our AI agent. So I feel like he seeded that with you. I see you two. I see right through you guys. You're trying to lure me in. You're not going to get me.
I haven't seen Jeff since October, so I'd love to chat about it.
But no, it's very interesting. So if we're looking at to be fine-tuned on that response is that the information sources are proliferating, right? You've the goal, the secret sauce is what you guys know in your four walls of a company, right? That's where your competitive advantage lives. Then you have these kind of data sets that you pay for access to, right? That enrich that worldview. And then on the outside, you have these like publicly available data sets where it's like, you can go scrape the web for them, but it's kind of like grain of salt. So when you start getting into these type of ratings that you can do in terms of like strength of relationship analysis or sentiment analysis that we're doing with their AI based on the quality, like you said, of the data and the importance of it in that equation, you can gather a lot, but you have to weigh the stuff that's the most important, which is your data, which puts an even bigger importance on making sure it's good.
Well, and that's why clearly we can scrape a million data points, a billion data points, but that's why the people portion is still incredibly important, especially in an industry like this where there's such a high value put on the white glove service aspect and high touch nature of how we interact with our clients. And data is generally there. And sometimes you just have to ask a couple more questions, and it takes time to build. But like the more that you have it in a system accurately, the easier it is to maintain over time, right? Because there's a standard, there's a process, there's a validation rule on a field that says, no, that zip code is wrong. There's a lot that can be done to put guardrails on this stuff. And from a systems perspective, so that things are required to be clean from the get-go, then really you just have to teach people why those guardrails are in place and why it's important to bring them up and think through what you're entering in.
Absolutely. Yeah, and you can see from a lot of the answers you've given, Lauren, you can see the same thing where there's this like the psychology of the why and the story of why that day is important, but then it's married to how do we create a system that makes you do those steps, because sometimes we have a Friday, right? And so we need those guardrails, but the psychology of the why and being asked it like forms the design of the system that enforces it, right?
Yeah.
So I love that. I am kind of curious, especially at VIRIDIS and thinking about your solutions as you look out as a more nascent company that's agile and trying to look forward a little bit more than other people. Are there technology trends that are exciting you within the portal space or areas of adoption that you're seeing that are kind of an outlier from what people do today?
Our ability to start giving investors information in like a dashboard visual format in the portal is going to be really important to continuing to grow. I think that giving people the ability to drill down into their information is more and more important because people are getting used to seeing that across the board. And I don't have a whole lot of experience with other fund administrators or other portal operations perspectives. But in this one, I think that adding those new pieces of functionality will make a really big difference for people. That kind of like aggregated information can help encourage people to make better decisions across the board for their money. You log into your Fidelity account or your Transamerica account, and you can play with what it is that you're doing. You can see how making different decisions would impact, your growth and those sorts of things. And I hope that we can kind of head in similar directions to give people the information that they're getting used to seeing with larger markets. So yeah, I think that those things paired with the AI tools that we talk about, AI service support that can improve turnaround time on people's questions and predictive analytics built into stuff eventually. I think that those are the directions that I get excited about. And I imagine that our clients will too.
All right. So I always ask a different way, but if you were someone, because you took your career in a different direction, as you're doing that, I'm sure there was a big goal moment in terms of like, making this change or making this turn. If someone was in that same position today, is there a book, a voice, a profile that you would recommend to listen to help them kind of gain the courage to do it or find comfort in the decision?
I don't have one in particular, but I would really encourage anyone that is at a turning point like that to ask themselves a lot of whys and to see what I did there. And, and
real nice.
Podcasts have made a major difference in my learning and my career path. Right out of grad school in 2019, I went into a job that was a perfectly good job, but it wasn't something that I was going to be doing for a super long time. And I had to take a deep breath and start looking for other things. And I didn't really know what that was quite yet. And I listened to a lot of kind of personal development podcasts and those sorts of things. Some by like ex-NFL players. And, there's this one, the Rachel Hollis podcast. I listen to her all the time. She's a pretty big woman in media and business. And she posts a lot of stuff about trusting yourself and how to make wise business choices, and really talks about surrounding yourself with the right people. The idea that if you're the smartest person in the room or the most driven person in the room, that you should maybe look for another room. And I think that those ideas really help me be brave enough to switch gears and to ask for my value. And that was really the biggest thing, was you get to a new role. And I think often we tend to be yes people and say like, yes, I can do that. Yes, I can do that. And eventually you're doing 3 people's jobs in order to keep the one that you signed up for. And I know I said I graduated in 2019, but I'm a little older than most recent grads. So like younger folks who are trying to make decisions about what's next for them, I think that just remembering that the next thing you do is probably, hopefully, not the last thing you're going to do, and that you can generally take a few steps back if it doesn't work. I've been really lucky that I've had a fantastic safety net behind me in my family, and they've always encouraged me to do the next thing and explore. And so, yeah, read a lot, listen a lot. There's so much out there. Listening to a lot of different perspectives is what allowed me to know that no matter which one I kind of walk towards, there's going to be a million options. You just have to be willing to pick one and then pick another and then pick another. So,
yeah, it's almost like the compounding interest of courage of making those little small steps, and then eventually they lead you there.
Yeah.
Cool. Perfect. So you said you listen to Preferred Return every day, which is what I heard.
Yeah. That's it.
That's it.
Though, I actually, when you guys first reached out to me to have this chat, seeing Ben McCarthy, Salesforce Ben, on here was so exciting, because before this job, my initial role with my last firm was I was a Salesforce admin, and I got my certification there, and I bought all my study materials from Salesforce Ben.
Oh, that's funny.
I literally picked up the phone and called my old colleague. I was like, I'm going to be on the podcast that Salesforce Ben was just on. It's the nerdiest of fangirl moments.
That's great. I will be sure to send it on to him. That'll probably make his day. So that's awesome. Well, great. That's it. We didn't cover it in a linear fashion, but thank you so much. This was great. There's so many themes that came out of this that you can tell. It's like whenever we start talking to people who are truly passionate about what they do and like think about it a lot, you start to see these themes like just emerge and crystallize about the stories, architecture, and the why that sits behind it, and questioning things. Like, so really appreciate you taking the time to do this, think about it, give such great answers, because this was wonderful. This is everything I could expect. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to see what comes of it.
Thanks for listening to Preferred Return. If you found this episode thought-provoking, consider subscribing wherever you get your podcasts. For more information about today's topic or for additional takeaways to own your technology edge, visit altvia.com. That's altvia.com. We're back next month with another episode, so stick around and let's make sure you get that preferred return.